The most feared mafia king built his empire on control, but the night a little girl walked into his fortress and whispered about a woman who died years ago, his world didn't just shake, it started to collapse from the inside. Because what she knew could expose a betrayal buried so deep, it was never meant to be found. The iron gates of the Moretti compound opened without sound, and that silence was more terrifying than any siren. Beyond them stood a fortress of black glass, marble columns, armed shadows, and men who understood that one wrong breath could cost them everything. Inside the main hall, chandeliers burned like frozen stars above a floor polished enough to reflect fear itself. No one laughed there. No one spoke loudly. Even loyalty moved quietly in that house, because the man who ruled it did not need noise to prove his power. Dante Moretti entered just before midnight. The room changed the second he appeared. He wore a black tailored suit, no tie, no softness, no wasted movement. His men straightened before they realized they had done it. His enemies called him a monster. His soldiers called him king. In the city, his name controlled ports, judges, hotels, secrets, and debts no one survived refusing. But inside his own compound, he controlled something stronger than money. Silence. One glance from him could stop a room. One raised hand could begin a war. One whisper from his mouth could decide who stayed safe and who disappeared from the empire forever. Tonight, the compound was filled with elite guests, governors, bankers, syndicate heirs, and women in diamonds pretending they were not afraid. They had come for a private alliance dinner, but everyone knew the truth. Dante was choosing who would stand close to his throne before the coming storm. Betrayal had been moving through the city like poison, and every man in that hall wanted to prove he was not the traitor. Then the child walked in. She could not have been more than 7. Barefoot, small, pale, wearing a white nightdress that did not belong in that world of guns hidden under silk jackets and deals sealed behind locked doors. Her dark hair fell messily around her face, and in her tiny hand she held a gold chess piece. A queen. Every guard froze. A woman gasped, then swallowed the sound as if it had burned her throat. The pianist stopped mid-note. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. Somewhere near the staircase, Dante's underboss reached for his weapon, but Dante lifted 2 fingers, and the command took control of the room instantly. Nobody moved. The child stood beneath the chandelier, looking directly at Dante Moretti as if she had been searching for him all her life. His heart pounding once. Only once. But he felt it. No child entered the inner compound by accident. No servant brought her. No camera alarm had sounded. No guard had reported movement. The west wing was sealed. The nursery floor was empty. The guest quarters were locked. Yet she stood there, breathing softly in the center of his empire, holding a queen in a house built by kings and monsters. Dante stepped toward her. The guest stepped back. He stopped close enough to see the bruise-colored shadows beneath her eyes, the strange calm in her face, the way she did not tremble despite the danger around her. She should have cried. She should have begged. She should have hidden behind someone bigger. But she only lifted the chess piece. Dante's voice dropped into a deadly whisper. "Who brought you into my house?" The little girl blinked once. Then she placed the gold queen on the marble floor between them and whispered, "She said you would protect me." The air went colder. Dante's jaw tightened. Who said that? The child looked past him, toward the sealed portrait wall where no guest was ever allowed to look. Her small voice barely touched the silence. "The woman in the red dress. The one who cries when you say mine." Dante stopped breathing. Because there was only one woman who had ever worn red in that house. Only one woman he had ever called mine. Only one woman whose death had turned him from man into king. And she had been buried 3 years ago. The child tilted her head, innocent and impossible, then whispered, "She said the traitor is close." Dante looked at the chess piece again. The gold queen was warm. Before the child ever crossed Dante Moretti's marble floor, there was a girl running through the rain with one hand pressed to her side and the other wrapped around a stolen keycard. Her name was Elena Vale, though the men hunting her knew her by a colder name. Witness. She had spent the last 6 months hiding in basements, motel rooms, church kitchens, and bus stations where no camera looked too long. She had learned to sleep with her shoes on, to count exits before counting people, to swallow fear before it showed on her face. Elena had not been born into danger. She had been dragged into it by accident, by loyalty to the wrong person, and one terrible night she was never meant to survive. She had worked as a night archivist in a private medical institute used by the city's most powerful families. Quiet job. Clean floors. Locked files. Men in expensive coats who never gave their real names. Then one evening, while replacing old patient records, She found a sealed folder hidden beneath a false drawer. Inside were adoption papers, blood tests, photographs, and one name repeated like a secret curse. Moretti. That was when her life broke open. The next morning, her supervisor vanished. By sunset, two strangers were waiting outside her apartment. By midnight, her phone was dead, her bank account frozen, and every friend she called suddenly stopped answering. Elena understood then that the city had teeth, and those teeth were closing around her breath by breath. But she did not collapse. She did not beg the world to save her. She was not a victim. She became a woman who noticed patterns, copied codes, changed routes, and listened through walls. Pain taught her how to disappear. Terror taught her how to move. The child came into her life 3 nights ago. Elena had been hiding in the storage room of an abandoned chapel near the docks when she heard soft crying behind the altar. Not loud crying. Not the spoiled sob of a frightened child. It was controlled, almost careful, as if the little girl already knew noise could invite monsters. When Elena found her, she was curled inside a wooden confessional, holding a gold queen chess piece against her chest. Her white nightdress was damp from rain. Her eyes were too calm for her age. She gave her name as Mira. Nothing else. Elena should have taken her to the police, but the folder had taught her the police were not always safe. It had taught her that certain names traveled faster than emergency calls. So she kept Mira close, wrapped her in her own coat, and ran again. Every hour after that, the hunt grew tighter. A black sedan appeared twice. A man with a silver ring waited outside the bus terminal. A woman in a red scarf watched them from across the street and whispered into her phone. Someone wanted the child. Someone powerful enough to erase Elena's life without leaving fingerprints. But Elena was not helpless. She knew how to read locked systems because archives had locks. She knew how to forge employee access because hospitals had careless night staff. She knew how to stay invisible because invisible women heard everything. On the 4th night, she stole a compound delivery badge from a courier, memorized the shift rotation of Dante Moretti's guards, and walked Mira through the service entrance hidden beneath the West Garden. Her heart pounding so violently she thought the cameras would hear it, Elena pushed the child forward and stayed behind the stone archway, hidden in shadow. She had not entered the Mafia Boss's world for protection. She had entered it because the file said Mira belonged there. And because the same blood test that connected the child to Dante Moretti also carried another name, Elena's. From the darkness, Elena watched Dante kneel before the little girl. She saw the king's face change when Mira spoke of the woman in red. She saw power crack just for a second beneath grief. Then a cold hand closed around Elena's mouth from behind, and a familiar voice whispered near her ear, "You should have stayed dead." Dante Moretti was not simply a man. He was a system built on control, sharpened by betrayal and crowned by silence. His empire did not rise through chaos, but through precision so exact that even governments adjusted their decisions around him. Ports opened when he allowed it. Contracts lived or died based on a single nod. Entire families survived because they chose loyalty early, and others vanished because they chose it too late. In the underworld, his name was not spoken loudly. It was carried in a whisper, passed carefully between men who understood that fear, when respected, kept you alive. He had built everything from ruin. Years ago, before the suits and marble halls, Dante had been a man with something softer inside him. A man who believed in promises, in futures that did not require blood-stained deals or quiet disappearances. That version of him died the night his world collapsed under a betrayal so deep it rewrote his very nature. Since then he did not trust emotion. He did not trust mercy. He trusted only power, structure, and the quiet certainty that control was the only thing standing between order and war. And yet, tonight, something in his empire had slipped. The child standing before him did not fit into any system he controlled. Dante remained still, his gaze fixed on the gold queen resting against the marble floor. It was a small object, almost meaningless to anyone else, but to him it felt like a fracture opening beneath his feet. He could feel every eye in the room watching him, waiting for the decision that would restore balance. This was his domain. Nothing entered without purpose. Nothing remained without his approval. The logical response was immediate. Remove the threat. Erase the disruption. Restore control. But he did not move. Instead he studied her. The girl's posture was calm, unnaturally so. No trembling. No panic. Her breath was steady, her eyes unwavering as they held his. Children reacted to him in predictable ways. They cried. They hid. They reached for someone stronger. This one did none of those things. She stood in the center of his power as if she belonged there, as if fear had already passed through her and found nothing left to claim. That was what unsettled him. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice quieter now, controlled, dangerous. The girl did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted across the room, lingering on faces that refused to meet hers. Then she looked back at him, and something in her expression shifted. Not fear. Recognition. "You already know," she said softly. The words landed heavier than any threat. Behind Dante, his men waited. They trusted him without question. That was the foundation of his empire. Loyalty built through certainty, not doubt. If he hesitated even for a second, it would ripple through them. Not openly. Not loudly. But it would exist. And in Dante's world, even the smallest crack could grow into betrayal. He should have ended it. One command. One gesture. And the situation would dissolve into silence again. But the memory of a woman in a red dress refused to leave his mind. The way she used to stand too close to him, fearless in a way that had once felt impossible. The way she had whispered truths no one else dared to speak. The way her absence had carved something hollow inside him that no amount of power had ever filled. The child's words echoed again. "The one who cries when you say mine." Impossible. And yet, the girl had walked into his compound without resistance. Past layers of security that had never failed. Past men trained to detect threats before they even formed. That alone was not coincidence. That was design. Or something far worse. Dante exhaled slowly, regaining control. He bent down, picking up the gold queen from the floor. It was warm, as if it had been held for too long. As if it carried something more than metal. Then he straightened, his decision settling into place like a final move in a game no one else understood. "Clear the room," he ordered. The command rippled instantly. Guests moved. Guards shifted. Within seconds, the grand hall emptied, leaving only Dante, the child, and a handful of his most trusted men. Every instinct in him still screamed the same truth. Danger. Unknown. Unacceptable. But something deeper, something buried beneath years of control and hardened power, refused to let him act. Dante looked at the girl again. "You stay," he said. Silence fell. Because the king of the most ruthless empire in the city had just made a decision that defied every rule he lived by. And somewhere in the shadows behind the walls, unseen and close enough to hear everything, the traitor smiled. The silence inside the Moretti compound did not last. It never did when betrayal was already inside the walls. Dante stood facing the child, the gold queen still resting in his palm, when the first shift in the air occurred. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to a man who had built his empire on control, it felt like a crack beneath his feet. One of the overhead lights flickered once. Then again. A guard near the west entrance adjusted his stance, his breath slightly uneven. Another man glanced toward the surveillance panel mounted near the column, his expression tightening for a fraction of a second before he masked it. Dante noticed everything. His heart pounding once, slow and controlled. Danger. Not from outside. From within. "Lock the inner gates," Dante said calmly, his voice cutting through the space with absolute power. But the command came a second too late. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hall in a single, suffocating moment. Not chaos. Not noise. Just a heavy, calculated silence that pressed against the lungs like something alive. Then the emergency red lights flickered on, bathing the marble floor in a low, ominous glow that turned every shadow into a threat. War had entered his house. "Stay close," Dante said quietly, his hand moving without hesitation to rest against the child's shoulder, pulling her just behind him. It was instinct, not strategy. And that alone was enough to unsettle him. His men moved instantly, forming a perimeter around him with practiced loyalty, but something was wrong. The formation was incomplete. 2 positions were missing. 2 trusted guards who should have been there were not. Betrayal. Dante's jaw tightened. From the far end of the hall, a low metallic click echoed. Not loud. Not obvious. But deliberate. Someone was testing the silence. Testing him. A message without words. The child moved. Not back. Not into hiding. Forward. Her small hand slipped from behind Dante's coat, reaching toward the marble floor as if she was searching for something only she could see. For a split second, Dante's control wavered. "Stop," one of his men snapped, stepping toward her. But the girl ignored him. She knelt, placing her fingers lightly against a seam between the marble tiles. A place no one had noticed. A place no one had reason to notice. Then, with a quiet, almost absent motion, she pressed down. A soft mechanical shift answered her. The floor beneath the far column slid open by inches. Hidden. Concealed within his own compound. Dante's gaze sharpened instantly. Someone had built a secondary access point inside his empire without his knowledge. Not an external breach. An internal design. That was not just betrayal. That was planning for war. Before anyone could react, a low vibration pulsed through the ground, followed by a faint whisper of movement below the surface. Not footsteps. Not running. Controlled advancement. Whoever was coming knew exactly where to go. Dante moved instantly, pulling the child back to his side. "Behind me," he ordered. This time it was not instinct. It was decision. Protect. His men tightened formation, but the uncertainty was already there. The unknown passage. The missing guards. The silence that was too precise to be random. Someone close to him had designed this moment. Someone who understood his systems well enough to break them from the inside. The girl looked up at him. Her expression was not afraid. It was focused. "They're not coming for you," she whispered. Dante stilled. "What did you say?" Her small fingers tightened slightly against the fabric of his coat. "They're coming for the queen." For a second, Dante did not understand. Then his grip around the gold chess piece tightened. Heart pounding. Not him. Not his empire. The realization hit with a force he had not felt in years. This child was not just part of the situation. She was the center of it. The reason the gates had been bypassed. The reason the hidden passage existed. The reason someone inside his own circle had risked everything. Dante's gaze darkened as he looked down at her. "Who are you?" he asked again, but this time the question carried something deeper. Not control. Not authority. Recognition. The girl met his eyes. And for the first time she smiled faintly. "Not who," she whispered. "What?" From beneath the floor, the hidden passage opened wider. And Dante Moretti understood one impossible truth. She was not just the child he needed to protect. She was the key to something far bigger than his empire. The hidden passage beneath the marble floor remained open, breathing out a cold, unfamiliar presence into Dante Moretti's empire. But the King of Shadows did not step back. He did not retreat. He adjusted. That was how he survived. That was how he ruled. And now, for reasons he could not yet explain, that adjustment included the small girl standing beside him. "Seal the lower access," Dante ordered, his voice steady, absolute. His men moved instantly, though uncertainty lingered beneath their loyalty. The system had been compromised. That truth alone meant nothing inside these walls could be fully trusted anymore. Except his own decisions. And right now his decision was her. Dante's hand closed firmly around the girl's shoulder, pulling her close, positioning her slightly behind him but not out of reach. It was not gentle. It was not soft. It was deliberate. What? The word did not leave his lips, but it settled into the air around him like a silent claim. Not ownership. Responsibility. Protect. The girl did not resist. She adjusted to his movement as if she understood exactly what he was doing. Her breath remained calm, steady against the rising tension in the room. No panic. No confusion. Only awareness. That alone made her more dangerous than anything emerging from the shadows below. "Stay with me," Dante said quietly. This time it was not an order. It was something closer to instinct. For the first time since entering the compound, the girl shifted slightly closer to him. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Dante felt it. The difference between distance and trust was measured in inches. And she had just crossed it. Say, the word did not belong in his world. And yet, for a fleeting second, it existed between them. Around them his empire adjusted to the new threat. Doors locked automatically. Surveillance systems flickered as backups activated. His most trusted men repositioned, forming a tighter circle. But even within that structure, Dante could feel it. The shift. The fracture. Someone inside his circle had made this possible. Betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. And it was close. The girl looked up at him again, her small fingers lightly gripping the fabric of his sleeve. Not clinging. Not desperate. Just anchored. "They're changing direction," she whispered. Dante's gaze sharpened instantly. "How do you know?" She tilted her head slightly, listening to something no one else could hear. "Because they're not looking for the entrance anymore. They're looking for the center." The center. Dante's mind moved quickly. Not the gates. Not the vault. Not the command room. His grip on her tightened slightly. External enemies were closing in, but they were not moving blindly. They were adjusting. Adapting. That meant they had information. Real-time information. Someone inside was feeding them every move, every shift in control. Dante leaned slightly closer to her, his voice dropping into a controlled whisper. If you know where they're going, you stay close to me. You don't move. You don't speak unless I ask. Understood? The girl nodded. But then she did something unexpected. She stepped half a pace forward. Not away from him. With him. It was small. But it changed everything. Power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it shifted quietly in moments no one else noticed. And in that moment, the balance between them adjusted. Not enough to challenge him. Not enough to break his control. But enough to exist. She was no longer just someone he was protecting. She was part of the equation. Dante felt it. And for the first time he did not resist it. The girl's voice came again, softer this time. You think they want me because I'm important. Dante didn't answer. Because it was true. Her fingers tightened slightly against his sleeve, her breath brushing against the silence between them. That's not why, she said. Dante looked down at her. What do you mean? Her eyes met his, calm, steady, carrying something far too heavy for a child. They're not coming because of me, she whispered. Pause. A shift. A truth waiting to break something open. They're coming, she said quietly, because of what I remember. Dante's entire body stilled. And for the first time since the night began, something unfamiliar moved beneath his control. Uncertainty. What do you remember? He asked. The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, her voice barely a breath against the silence. I saw who betrayed you. The words did not echo, yet they shattered something deeper than sound ever could. I saw who betrayed you. For a moment, Dante Moretti did not move. The empire he built thrived on certainty. On control so absolute that even doubt was a weakness he could not afford. But now, standing in the center of his own stronghold with danger rising beneath his feet and a child holding truths no one else should possess, that certainty fractured. Slowly he turned toward her. Then you're going to tell me, he said, his voice calm, but something colder lived beneath it now. Something edged with suspicion. With calculation. With betrayal already taking shape. The girl did not step back. She met his gaze with the same unnatural steadiness, her breath even, her presence unshaken by the weight of his power. That alone would have been enough to mark her as different. But it was what came next that shifted everything. My name isn't Mira, she said softly. Dante's eyes narrowed. I know, he replied. You were never just a lost child. She nodded slightly as if acknowledging a truth already understood between them. My name is Alara Moretti. The world did not collapse. It narrowed. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of red light faded into something distant and irrelevant. Dante's mind did not reject the name. It recognized it. Instantly. Violently. Because it was impossible. And yet it fit too perfectly. The blood records Elena had stolen. The sealed files. The hidden connections no one was meant to uncover. The woman in the red dress. The one lost Dante had never allowed himself to revisit. Alara. A name that had never been spoken outside one room. A name that had been erased before it could exist. Dante's hand tightened slightly at his side. That's not possible, he said, but the certainty in his voice was already slipping. The girl, Alara, tilted her head. She didn't die the way they told you, she whispered. Dante's jaw clenched. They, he repeated. She stepped half a pace closer, her voice dropping into something quieter, heavier. The ones you trust. The ones who stayed close after she was gone. The ones who helped you rebuild your empire. Each word landed like a slow fracture. Loyalty. The foundation of everything he had built. Now turning into something uncertain. Dangerous. You're lying, one of his men said sharply from behind him, but Dante raised a hand without looking back, silencing him instantly. Because he needed to hear this. Even if it destroyed something he could never rebuild. Alara's gaze did not waver. I remember the room, she said. The night everything changed. I remember her voice. I remember the man who stood behind you. The one you didn't see. Dante's heart pounding once. Harder this time. Say his name, he demanded. But she shook her head. I can't, she whispered. Not yet. The refusal should have ended it. In his world, hesitation meant deception. Uncertainty meant threat. And threats were eliminated before they could grow. That was how he survived. That was how he ruled. But something held him back. Not weakness. Not mercy. Something deeper. Because every instinct told him she was not lying. And that was far more dangerous. She was supposed to be erased, Alara continued, her voice quieter now, carrying something almost fragile beneath its strength. But someone didn't follow the order. Someone kept me hidden. Moved me. Protected me. Dante's gaze hardened. Why? Ilara's answer came without hesitation. Because I wasn't just a child, she said. I was proof. Proof. The words settled heavily between them. Proof of what? Of betrayal. Of lies. Of something inside his empire that had been wrong from the very beginning. Dante turned away from her for a brief moment, his mind moving faster than anyone around him could follow. Every memory. Every alliance. Every man who had stood beside him after that night. Reevaluated. Re-examined. Loyalty was no longer certain. And that changed everything. When he looked back at her, his expression had shifted completely. No longer just control. No longer just power. Something far more dangerous. Conflict. You understand what you're saying? He said slowly. What you represent. Ilara nodded. Yes. Silence stretched. Heavy. Decisive. Because there were only two paths forward now. One preserved his empire. The other risked everything. Dante stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming, his voice dropping into a final, quiet whisper. If you're lying, he said, I end this. Not a threat. A fact. Ilara did not flinch. And if I'm not? She asked. Dante didn't answer immediately. Because for the first time in years, the King of Shadows stood at a crossroads he could not control. Destroy her. Or protect her. And either choice would start a war. War did not announce itself with chaos. It arrived with precision. The hidden passage beneath the compound opened fully now, and the silence that followed was more dangerous than any explosion. Dante Moretti did not step back. He stepped forward. Because this was no longer about uncertainty. The moment had chosen its side. And so did he. She stays with me, Dante said. The command was absolute. Not for his men. For his empire. A shift moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. This was not strategy. This was decision. The king had chosen, and in doing so, he had rewritten the balance of power within his own walls. Protect over control. Ilara stood beside him, no longer hidden, no longer uncertain. The fear that should have lived in her had already burned away long ago. She had spent her life running, surviving, adapting. But now, standing at the center of the storm she had unknowingly carried with her, something inside her changed. She was not a victim. She became powerful. The first movement came from below. Figures emerged from the passage, not rushing, not careless. Controlled. Measured. They knew the layout. They knew the positions. They moved like men who had studied the empire from the inside because they had. That alone confirmed everything. This was not an attack. This was an execution. Dante's gaze hardened. Formation, he ordered. His men shifted instantly, loyalty locking into place, but the hesitation from earlier was gone now. War erased doubt. War demanded clarity. And clarity had arrived. Ilara stepped forward. Not behind him. Beside him. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Dante noticed. He did not stop her. Because she was no longer something to shield. She was part of the battlefield. They're not here to take me, Ilara said quietly, her eyes scanning the room with an awareness no child should possess. They're here to force you to choose. Dante's voice lowered. I already did. Their enemies paused. Just for a second. Because even they had not expected that. The king of the most ruthless empire in the city had chosen the unknown over his own structure. That hesitation, that single break in their expectation shifted the entire field. Power moved. Not loudly. But decisively. The red emergency lights cast long shadows across the marble floor as the two sides faced each other. No one fired. No one rushed. This was not chaos. This was control meeting control. And in the center of it stood Dante and Ilara. King and queen. Unspoken. But undeniable. Ilara's gaze moved quickly, calculating, connecting patterns no one else could see. The passage. The positioning. The timing. It all aligned into something larger. Something planned far beyond a single night. They're not the end, she whispered. They're the message. Dante didn't take his eyes off the figures ahead. Then we send one back. For the first time, Ilara allowed herself to breathe differently. Not fear. Not survival. Purpose. Her hand lifted slightly, pointing toward the far column where the surveillance panel flickered unevenly. There, she said. Dante's eyes followed. A blind spot. Not accidental. Designed. His empire had been mapped from the inside out. They've been watching you longer than you think, Ilara added. Dante's expression darkened, but there was no hesitation now. No internal conflict. Only clarity. They won't watch me fall, he said. The air shifted again. tension tightening, war settling into its final shape. And then, a voice. Come. Familiar. Close. You always did choose emotion over logic in the end. Dante froze. Not from fear. From recognition. Slowly, from the shadows near the upper balcony, a figure stepped forward. Not rushed. Not hidden. Confident. Controlled. Someone who did not need to sneak into the Empire. Because he had never truly left it. Dante's heart pounding once. Then steady again. Silas, he said. His most trusted advisor. His strategist. The man who had stood beside him through every war, every deal, every moment that built the Empire into what it was today. Loyalty. Or the perfect illusion of it. Silas smiled faintly, his gaze shifting from Dante to Alara. You were never supposed to find her, he said softly. The truth settled like a final blade between them. Not an external enemy. Not an unknown force. The betrayal had always been close. Inside the Empire. Inside his circle. Inside his trust. And now, standing above them with complete control of the situation, Silas spoke the final truth that shattered everything Dante thought he knew. She was never the key to your future, he said. Pause. A quiet breath. She was the proof of your past, and the reason your empire was always meant to fall. Silas's words did not shake the walls of the Moretti compound. They shook something far more dangerous. Truth. Dante Moretti stood still, his gaze locked onto the man he had trusted more than any other. Not because he doubted what he was hearing, but because he understood it too quickly. Every detail aligned. Every missing piece settled into place. The hidden passage. The blind spots. The perfect timing of the war unfolding inside his empire. Loyalty had not broken tonight. It had been broken long ago, and he had allowed it to stand beside him. Alara did not step back. She stepped forward. Not as a child. Not as something to protect. But as something becoming. Silas's attention shifted fully toward her, his expression calm, almost amused, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. You were never meant to stand here, he said. You were meant to disappear quietly like the rest of the truth. Alara's breath slowed. Steady. Controlled. Her eyes held his without fear, without hesitation. She didn't disappear, Alara replied softly. You just thought she did. Something in Silas's smile tightened. For the first time. A fracture. Small. But real. Dante noticed. Power shifted in silence. The king did not raise his voice. He did not issue orders. He did not need to. His presence alone changed the air. His empire, even fractured, still responded to him. Still aligned with him. Still recognized him as the center. But this time he did not stand alone at that center. Alara moved closer to him. Close enough that their presence felt unified. Not command and protection. Something else. Balance. Silas's gaze flickered between them, calculating. You're making the same mistake you made years ago, he said to Dante. Choosing emotion over control. Dante's voice was quiet. But final. No, he said. I'm correcting it. Silence followed. Heavy. Decisive. Because this was no longer about the empire that had been. It was about what came next. Alara stepped forward again, her small hand lifting slightly, not in fear, not in defense, but in understanding. The room, the structure, the movement of people, the pattern of power, she saw it all. Not as a child trying to survive, but as someone who belonged inside it. She was not a victim. She became powerful. They built everything around your blind spot, she said quietly to Dante. Around what you refused to question. Dante's gaze did not leave Silas. I know, he replied. And that was the difference. Before he had ruled through control alone. Now he saw beyond it. Silas exhaled slowly, the confidence in his posture shifting into something sharper, more dangerous. You think this changes anything? He asked. Your empire was designed to fall the moment she was found. Everything you built was always temporary. Alara shook her head slightly. No, she said. Her voice was calm. Certain. You built it to fall, she corrected. He built it to survive. Silas's expression hardened. Because that was the first time anyone had challenged his version of truth. And it came from the one person he had tried to erase. The room held its breath. Waiting. Watching. The war did not end with noise. It ended with realization. Dante stepped forward just once, his presence filling the space with something undeniable. Not rage. Not reaction. Authority. Control redefined. You were right about one thing, Dante said quietly. This empire cannot stand the way it was. Silas watched him carefully. Then you finally understand. Dante's gaze sharpened. I understand that it needs to change. Not fall. Not break. Transform. Ilara stepped beside him fully now. Not behind. Not beneath. Beside. Queen. The shift was complete. Dante looked at her, not as something fragile, not as something temporary, but as something equal. Stay, he said. One word. But this time it was not protection. It was recognition. Ilara met his gaze. And for the first time, something close to warmth touched her expression. Only if we rebuild it differently, she replied. Dante nodded once. Together. The empire did not collapse. It evolved. Loyalty would no longer be blind. Power would no longer ignore truth. Control would no longer mean silence. Something new began to take shape in that moment. Stronger, sharper, unpredictable, and far more dangerous. But as the silence settled, as the immediate war faded into something quieter, something unresolved, Ilara's gaze shifted toward the darkened hallway beyond the compound. Her expression changed. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Recognition. There's still someone else, she whispered. Dante's eyes narrowed. Who? Ilara didn't answer immediately, because for the first time since the night began, her heart started pounding again. And this time, it wasn't because of the past. It was because of what was coming next. If this story pulled you in, if you felt that shift when the king chose truth over control, then stay with this story till the very end because what comes next changes everything. And if you believe power should protect, not destroy, make sure you're part of this journey because this empire is only getting started. Now tell me something. If you were in Dante's place, and the one person who could save your empire was also the proof it was built on betrayal, would you protect her, or would you destroy the truth before it destroys you?